Thank you for tuning into the Devy Devotional Podcast, a monthly show focusing on Devy prospects, strategies, and incoming rookies. Now here's your host.
Welcome into the Devy Devotional. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, and as always, I am joined by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter. Tonight we are going to be covering some late round C2C strategy and finishing or wrapping up the coverage of our recent C2C draft, or the campus side of the startup. And so we did the earlier rounds on the previous pod. If you haven't listened to that, definitely make sure you check that out. There was a lot of good jabs and poking fun, but also some really good stuff that you could learn from, some good strategy talk, and obviously just looking at who's going in what rounds and that kind of thing. But first of all, how are you doing, Aaron? And then we'll go ahead and dive in to some strategy talk here, buddy.
Doing great here. It's been a good week. Going to be a good weekend coming up here. So I am doing well. Thank you.
Absolutely, I'm excited. We have some preseason actual football, NFL football going on, and then we have some college football coming up here in a couple of weeks. So it's starting to get exciting. We're starting to get like practice reports even for the college players and things. So some of these questions that we have are probably going to be answered here pretty soon. It's going to be exciting, and that's what we'll probably be talking about pretty soon here. In the next week or two, are some of these players that maybe we have some question marks about, that we didn't know if they're going to be starter, who's going to win the job between Quinn Ewers and Hudson Card and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully we'll have some of those answers here pretty soon, and we can dive deep into that stuff in the next week or two. But for today, like I said, we're going to be doing some strategy talk for the later rounds of a campus startup. And so, why don't you go ahead and start us off? Obviously, we know, or the listeners know from listening last time, that you moved all around in the beginning. You made you made quite a few trades to get the players and the picks that you ended up with in the beginning. Did you continue that on in the back part of the campus draft, or did you kind of calm down at that point?
No, there was no calming down in this draft. Maybe slightly, but no, I was pretty furiously moving around. And I don't know. I like how the second half of the draft panned out. So we'll have to talk a little bit about maybe favorite guys to target in those later rounds, strategies and whatnot. But yeah, I definitely kept trading just to get my guys. And, it was kind of sad. Sometimes you're splitting hairs. Can I trade up here in the 41st round or whatever the case is? But that's what happened. And I'm happy with a lot of the selections for sure.
Yeah, I like you said, you kept moving on. I don't think I made my first trade until pick like 32 or round 32, something like that. So, I finally got into the trading waters at that point, but it just didn't really make a lot of sense to me before that. So I kind of stuck, to my plan of just, picking the best players, like whoever was falling to me at the time. One thing I did kind of notice in like the mid rounds, not necessarily like the late rounds, but like, 16 through 20, there's a lot of, maybe it's just some players that maybe had hype like last year or 2 years ago or whatever it was, but it seemed like there was a lot of players that I don't necessarily love in those rounds, that are just like players that I think are, like there's the RB dead zone in, that a lot of people talk about in like dynasty drafts and stuff like that, or even in redraft drafts. It kind of felt like that, where it's kind of just a dead zone of players that are probably never going to like truly do anything, but yet are still being, drafted pretty early or, somewhat early, that kind of thing. Did you kind of notice that as well? Like there was a certain lull in the draft?
Yeah, there were lulls, and that was part of the reason that I wanted to trade up early and often, but then kind of kept that up throughout the draft, because when there's a lot of mad guys, a lot of guys that you don't have a bunch of confidence in, if you see one guy that you're really higher on than the rest, or you think has a great opportunity, whatever the case is, get that guy, because like you said, there's somewhat of a dead zone. But hey, if you dive deep enough, if you have a really sound strategy, you can usually find guys that are really going to help you out, or maybe some hidden gems along the way, even in those mid rounds and going into the late rounds too.
Yeah, so I didn't truly have a strategy going in, even to the draft. I told you or I talked about it on the last pod how I knew I was pretty set at QB on the NFL side, and so I wasn't going to truly focus on the campus side. Obviously, if somebody fell to me that I loved, then I was going to take advantage of that. But that didn't really truly work out. So I didn't really freak out about the QBs there. Now in the mid to late rounds, I did start like actively going after some guys that I like. Even like a Jaden Daniels, who's probably forgotten in most circles, but I still have a little bit of hope for him, even on the NFL side. It might be slight, but slight's better than nothing. Especially when you're talking about, I don't remember exactly where I got him, but I probably got him, in the once again like the mid to late rounds. I'd have to look it up, but then we got about 5-10 rounds after that, and I'm like, well, Garrett Nussmeier's still there too, so why don't I just go ahead and take him? And then I think I ended up actually with all three. I think I took the who's the I can't even think of his name right now, but I think I took a third QB for LSU. I just said screw it, I'm just going to take them all.
Yeah, so you took Jaden Daniels in the 22nd. I think you took what was it, Nussmeier in the 27th, and then you took Miles Brennan in the 41st.
Yeah, so I got the whole gamut there, and I'm like, I'm feeling pretty good about like LSU's doing some good things and making some decent moves, and they might not be the LSU team that we would want them to be just yet, but like I said, they're kind of making moves. So I wanted to get I wanted to get at least a piece of that, and I ended up with all of them. What do you think of that kind of strategy? Is that something that you would do? I mean, obviously, like I don't recommend doing it like one after another, but I didn't do that. I went after the guy I wanted, and then it just seemed like after a certain amount of time, it was like, well, why not just go get these other guys?
Well, I was about to say, I don't normally see the triple tap of QBs in a room, but I actually did the same thing in this draft, if you can believe it. I drafted Bryce Young. I drafted, what's his name? The freshman. And then I drafted Monroe.
Ty Simpson and Monroe.
Yeah, Ty Simpson there. So, with the way that freshmen were moving off the board, I knew I needed to act on one of the freshman quarterbacks. It made sense to lock up Alabama one. He was, I think, the fourth or fifth of the incoming freshman class quarterbacks to be drafted. So I thought I got a good value at the end of the 7th round. And then I couldn't believe how late Jalen Milroe was fallen to the 20th round. So I was like, screw it. I didn't intend, going into this draft to draft all three of them or even draft some of the backups. But I mean, we know it's a good system. And like you said, you're trying to capture that upside if there's going to be good production for that team. So I don't mind it, but it has to be a very select situation. Majority of teams out there, no, wouldn't do it. So these bigger programs is when it's necessary or at least a viable option. But do you want to waste 3 roster spots? That's a personal question as well.
Yeah, like once again, if I had to do all of them or pick all of them in like the first 20-25 rounds, I'm not doing it. But I got Miles Brennan in the 41st round. At that point you're kind of trying to figure out who the hell actually has a chance of being on a roster or playing or finding playing time, like that kind of thing. And he at least has a shot. So I agree with you. Like it's not going to work in every draft, but just in this particular draft, I felt like everyone kind of rushed to the QBs pretty early, and then it just kind of died after that. Like everyone was just like, "Hey, I have the QBs. I have 2 or 3 that I like. I don't really need to go crazy." And then kind of in like the 35th to 45th rounds, like everyone started going wild for QBs again because they're like, "I don't know who else to take, so I'm just going to take a QB at this point."
Yeah, no, that's really true. And I drafted Sam Hartman in this draft, so hoping that things work out for the young man.
I know. I mean, obviously, we're hoping for the best for him. I wish we could get some, information. It sounds like he was working out, and then just something didn't feel right maybe after that. So I don't know exactly, what that would be, but it doesn't sound great. But they're saying he should be back at some point in the season. So I guess that's better news than it could be.
Absolutely, I agree.
So, like I said, I was not trying to triple tap the QBs. Neither were you, but that's how we ended up. That's kind of funny. I forgot that I knew that you had gotten Ty because I was looking at getting Ty as well, and you got him possibly even in the same round that I was looking at grabbing him because that's what you do. And so I'm not. I don't think either one of us are the biggest Milroe fan, but like you said, in the 20th round, it's really not something you. It feels good to have that Alabama, QB core there. So I definitely don't fault you for that. Was there anything else that you were truly trying to do in these mid to late rounds with the team that you had set up, from the earlier rounds?
Sure. And I will add with the Monroe thing, or Milroe, gosh, that last name. No, but I will add, he is just such a dynamic threat on the ground that even if he isn't this super nuanced passer, he's going to be putting up numbers. I mean, they might surpass what Bryce Young's doing. We've talked about the scoring settings in this league, slight decrease for the amount that just pocket passers are going to score. Milroe, he's so fun. So I liked that upside. And I also went for a little upside with my quarterbacks later on, guys who had good rushing floors. So ended up drafting like DTR in the 20s, probably a little bit of a reach, honestly. But I wanted to lock up another good quarterback, Colin Schley, Kent State. Let's see, who else did I draft? Jeff Sims, Georgia Tech. And then to change topics here, in my other draft, my supplemental draft that I just finished up with, very end of the draft, I drafted Donovan Smith. So you can see that I'm trying to take some upside shots on quarterbacks drafts, and that makes sense, right? I wish I would have, I drafted Cordero as well, and he's going to San Jose State. He's just a pure CFF producer, but I kind of wish I would have went a guy who had some NFL upside, just a dart throw, because what we've seen in past years, late rounds in C2C drafts, there's the Kenny Pickett's, Joe Burrows. Almost every year, there's one guy who emerges from those late rounds. It's not going to be the San Jose State quarterback, It's definitely not going to be one of those. So I lost a little bit of upside there, but I felt as though I needed to fill out my roster. And I think it's important for people going into their C2C drafts to know you should be drafting a little bit based on need as well as best player available. Of course, you don't want to pass on a player you love at any point in a draft, but you kind of got to fill out your roster. You have to have enough starting tight ends. You have enough of every position. And it's nice to have a blend between CFF, NFL potential, and that's my approach really for C2C. I know there's guys who just completely punt, like trying to draft NFL caliber prospects. If you can do a little bit of both, try to get your NFL guys in the early rounds and a lot of CFF producers later, I think that's optimal. And then you see the guys on the reverse where, they don't care about competing ever on the college side. It's all about upside. And I like a little bit of a blend, a balance, if you will, on your roster. So for Devy drafts, I think it should always just be best player available. For C2C, though, a little blend of need in there. But what do you think, John? Is that a fair strategy?
Absolutely. I was actually going to ask you how exactly you go about doing that. But I think just for myself, I stopped caring about ADP around like draft or like round 10, and then at that point I just really started looking at my ranks, and I'm like, do I feel like this is going to be a possible Devy player, or like an NFL player at some point, or do I truly think this is going to be a CFF stud? And so, being that it was my first startup ever for the C2C, or the campus side, I kind of struggled with where should I value the guys that still might have something like I drafted a Sam Heward from Washington, in round 17. He was a 5-star prospect. He's probably going to be the starter this year, or at least he has a decent shot at being the starter this year. But I mean, he looked terrible, last time. Though I think one game or however many games he ended up playing last year. So, I think I was kind of taking a shot on more like NFL production probably than even campus production there. But I think if he can hit. If that big 5-star prospect hits, then that's going to be huge for the NFL side. So how do you weigh like possible or like like you said, higher upside plays that might not necessarily help you on the campus side versus those campus studs? Like hold on, let me see who else. Like you took in the 17th round, you took like Trey Sanders, and maybe that's another one. Like you're kind of like going with the same thing where like he could be something. He hasn't really been able to put it all together because of injuries and car accident or whatever happened with them. So what are you looking in those rounds to like help you determine what which route you should go?
Yeah, I kind of bounced back and forth. So if you look at my draft, some of them, like Kobe Prentice, it's an Alabama freshman wide receiver. He might never see the field for Alabama. They're so deep there. Or he could be the starter. I mean, now we have news that what's his name's out. Going to be out for quite a few weeks now for injury, playing in the
JoJo
slots.
Earl,
Yeah,
by the
yeah,
way, is what's his name?
yeah, that guy. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, JoJo Earl. I mean, there's opportunity there. So that's just more of an upside play versus. I really thought that Tyrese Chambers was a guy, or Ally Jennings, Trey Palmer. Those are guys who can really put up a lot of firepower into your lineup. Going to be scoring potentially a lot this season. So I went back and forth, drafted freshman running back from Minnesota, Zach Evans, running back Jonathan Brooks, Texas. Guys who aren't really going to help me this season, but potentially will be huge for me in the future, and or maybe an NFL shot. But a few of those guys, Zach Evans, I'm not expecting NFL future. Just knowing the system of Minnesota, that helps a lot. And I did some system drafting, tried to pick the best talents that I liked that were maybe disguised on the rosters or hidden. Jonathan Brooks, I think he's a great flyer because Texas is becoming that RBU. All the good running backs are going to be coming out of there. It's going to be crazy. So he has a shot being right after Bijan. I think Amari Daniels, Texas A&M later, could be a more athletic version of Isaiah Spiller. Maybe not quite as big, but he at least has athleticism that Spiller lacked. So a little bit of upside here or there, but you have to individually monitor your roster throughout the draft and say, oh, wait, am I really lacking on starters? I gotta change my strategy a bit. I gotta go this direction or that. So I just think it's important to monitor as you go and then adjust. So best player available to a degree, but looking at your team needs again. So does that match up with what you were looking to do in this draft?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I picked up, at least in this draft, and obviously that's the only draft that I can compare, so it makes it tough. But in this one, I really started noticing that the youth started going, like the freshmen and the sophomores really started going pretty early. And by pretty early, I mean like in these rounds, like 15 through 20 or whatever. And so I started picking up on that, and at that point, I'd kind of missed probably like a freshman run. So I kind of missed out, and you had touched on it in like the review that you did for my team, where I think I only have 2 true freshmen on my campus team. Now, I had told you even, just off air and stuff like that, in the past that I really wasn't going to go too crazy on going in all in on true freshmen because to me, like they're the most risky. I mean, if you think people think rookie drafts are risky, where they have like 40, 50, 60% hit rates, then I mean, what are we talking about for hit rates with true freshmen? Like maybe 25%, something like that. So I was really fine missing out on some of these players, even though there's some 2025 players that I really do like and I expect big things from, but I was just okay, missing out on them because we see so many fail every year. And so I was just fine. But then after I missed out on a lot of those players, I started going in on like a decent amount of sophomore players, or at least like redshirt sophomores. It gets kind of funky with the COVID year and all that. Like some of these guys are even like a third year sophomore and all that. But I started really focusing on trying to get those players that were going to give me more long-term flexibility in this draft or in this league. And so I wasn't going to my team wasn't going to be dead at the end of the year. Even if I did really well this year, I didn't want my team to just be completely ruined, and I was going to have to really hope that I hit next year in the supplemental.
Yeah, good point. You did a nice job navigating that, avoiding drafting too many of the true freshmen, but still keeping it young enough where you're not decimated at the end of the year. So that was nice navigating there. I think there's a balance. If a true incoming freshman is a good value, like just dropping, eventually you got to take them. But reaching on true freshmen, like you said, it can be risky unless they're just this surefire type of prospect, which is kind of rare, I will admit. So you didn't see me going after a ton of true freshmen, but they were sprinkled in partially because I want to keep my team really young. And sometimes that's the cheapest you'll ever get them, especially the guys who are going into good systems, guys who have really good recruiting profiles, whatever the case is. So that's kind of the back and forth of should I go rookie heavy, should I not? And I will go off topic a little bit because I wanted to bring this up for supplemental drafters. That late round strategy might change a little bit depending on the number of picks you have. So, for example, if you have a 20 round supplemental draft and you happen to trade a lot, you landed 24, 26, whatever amount of supplemental picks. Sure, you can try to trade them for extra picks in future years. That might work. But if you end up saying, well, I'm going to have a few extra I got to cut down on, what should you do with those picks that you have? And what I recommend doing is just take an upside at the very end of the draft from schools that can put out either legitimate prospects or legitimate production. So, for example, latest supplemental I was in that situation. I drafted Caleb Johnson, true freshman for Iowa, great system. Trey Potts, Minnesota. If there was an injury to Mo Ibrahim, he's the perfect handcuff right now. I'll cut him before the start of the season. If there's no injuries there, if I need to. Donovan Smith, Texas Tech quarterback. If he doesn't win the job heading into this year, I could cut him. Let's see. Keon Burnett, freshman tight end for Arizona, one of the better tight ends in this incoming class. I'll have to decide what I want to do with him. And then
we don't talk about tight ends on Devy Devotionals.
It's not allowed. And then DeJuan Edwards, like running back for Georgia. I just think that he's an easy one to cut if there's maybe not an injury or if he doesn't climb the depth chart before week 1. So those were just examples of late round strategy for supplemental drafts that I think is important when you have to make decisions like, am I going to need to cut players at the end of the year? That's just some considerations to have.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, when you're, especially with the supplemental part, if you go into it kind of looking at it like a, like a redraft, like waiver wire kind of play, where you're just going to cut them if they do nothing or if they don't get the job, then, that's completely different. Now, obviously, it is different because most leagues don't let you just go to the waivers and pick up players. So, it's not like you're going to be able to cut them week 1 and do anything with them, but at least you'll get that answer. But I was looking through my team while you were talking because I just talked about how like I tried to go with some more youth in those rounds. And now this is all based off of Fantrax, which Fantrax doesn't do the best of staying up to date with like what year these guys are and everything. But so I'm just gonna go off of their grading system here or whatever. But from rounds 12 to 27, I went sophomore, junior, sophomore, freshman, sophomore, junior, sophomore, junior, freshman, sophomore, junior, freshman. And then that was the end of the 27th. And then I finally took a senior there in the 28th round. So I definitely tried to focus a little bit more on the youth and the depth there. And, I ended up getting some players like, we'd even talked about Jalen Mitchell the other day. And you definitely don't seem nearly as high as I am on him. But I was really happy to get Mitchell. And then, the nice thing is that I was able to bring it back and get Tyon Evans, kind of like what I did with the QBs with LSU. I did the same thing with Tyon Evans for the running backs here in round 30. And so I took Mitchell in round 24, and then 6 rounds later, I was able to get who I consider to be like the backup there, or, like at least the secondary running back. How do you feel about Mitchell? Like I said, we kind of talked about him before a few days ago, but it doesn't seem like you're ready for him to take the step that I think he's going to take.
Yeah, and it's just because the presence of Trevion Cooley. That's the only reason. And I get Cooley's not proven yet. He was a true freshman last year, and he only flashed. But what he did flash was really promising. And I think he's just such a capable player, both as a receiver and just as a running back, that's going to mean some issues for Mitchell and potentially Tyon Evans as well. So not that I hate either player. I just think that maybe it is a 3-way timeshare, and or I like Trevion Cooley just a little bit more. So I don't mind that stack though, because I personally am a fan of doing that. I don't have examples up on my team right now, but doing that, carrying that strategy out is a smart idea. Honestly, stacking guys at teams where you know they're going to put up some numbers. So I love that for maybe Alabama, Georgia. Let's see, Northern Illinois, Harrison Whaley, him and Ontario Brown. That's another example where you could stack those guys, or you could just draft them as standalone assets for sure. But I do not mind the double tap for the running backs either.
Yeah, and honestly, the biggest thing is, and I actually do like, I prefer Mitchell. I know that Cooley was a true freshman and everything, but just from the small sample that we saw with him, he doesn't seem, or he needs to take a step. Let me just put it that way. And so I prefer Mitchell as of right now. But the thing is that I was just looking it up, and Trevion Cooley went in the 11th round. Because Todd was doing Todd things, and so he took him in the 11th round. And then, like I said, I took Mitchell, who I actually like better, or at the very least the same or similar, in the 24th, and then Tyon in the 30th. So I was really trying to focus on some of these, like, even if they're not guaranteed anything, that like some of these players that are higher up in the depth chart that could have a shot, especially if there's an injury or whatever it is. And so I was perfectly fine with it, especially where I got it. But actually, once again, I'm probably one of the higher people on Mitchell. We'll see if that ends up working out for me or not. But why don't we get into some of our favorite picks of the draft? Regardless of team, obviously, we're going to go ahead and start with the best pick of the draft in the 26th round. Tay McWilliams out of Baylor, best pick of the draft, right?
Honestly, that was a great pick. Gosh, I have not ranked all the ones that I really like, but that's high up there, and I'm jealous. I should have acted on him sooner. Should have had him a little higher. And it sounds like you probably let him draft or fall too far. It worked out. It worked out for you, but that is pretty late for the guy who could be a starter there. They lost two backs that had significant production. Tay McWilliams has explosive playability. He flashed that in a small sample size, and he was a good recruit, playing at a Power 5 program. I mean, can I go on? The guy, he's the favorite to win the lead back job. The only other guy is a undersized running back in that backfield. I really like to pick John, so hats off to you there.
Yeah, I love it. And the funny thing is that I don't want to say I lucked into it. Like you said, I probably, now knowing what I know now, I probably should have drafted him earlier. So I mean, obviously it worked out that everyone was dumb enough to let me. No, I'm just kidding. But I wish there was 2,600 yards of rushing that left that team. Like that. Not only I actually think that McWilliams could be possibly like a Devy or an NFL player at some point. It's definitely not a guarantee, but he's explosive as hell. He's an athlete. And what he did in an extremely small sample was very, very, very exciting, to say the least. But he's just, everything just opened up, like the doors, the windows, everything opened up in front of him, and it's like there's so much like vacated rushing, vacated targets, all the vacation that came from or left from this team, and now he has such an opportunity ahead of him that I absolutely love it. And I mean, I've moved him up substantially because I knew that I liked him as a player, but I didn't really focus on the situation as much before. And then once I started looking at the situation, I was like, holy crap, I need to move this guy up my ranks.
Yeah, no, that was an excellent pick. And I do think that, the order should have been flipped for sure. Because you drafted like a Kobe Pace, Josh McCray, and Jalen Mitchell as running backs before Tay McWilliams. And, those guys I don't even have near the same tier. So I thought that you did very well with that pick.
And now it just sounds like I didn't even do well. I just got lucky.
Honestly, if you just keep drafting these guys in, let's say, good situations, good athletic talent, good recruits, all of that, I mean, you're going to have some success for sure.
All right, enough about me. What's another player that stood out as a great pick in the later rounds?
Yeah, well, I won't say that this was the best, because again, I didn't rank them, but I thought the pick right after you actually was a very good selection. John Emery Jr. Again, a super talented recruit back in the day. I know he's a little bit older. He hasn't had the best production. There's been some issues along the road with him, and last year he was out because of some academic issues or restrictions, but he's set up really well this year. All the buzz is that he's going to be their lead back. They don't have a lot there. I mean, Trey Bradford, I think as recently as this week, might be off the team, and he's been kind of off and on the team as well. So that running back room, I don't know, it could be open for the taking. And I think that they're going to default to their senior. So that's John Emery Jr. But just in case, I did draft Goodwin, Amani Goodwin, a little bit later in this draft too. Just in case they want to ride the younger guy, and or maybe he goes as the lead back into next year for LSU. So I like Todd's selection. Good job, Todd FF Bannerman, aka Team Banter
congrats.
Boys.
The first time we liked one of his picks,
Yeah, Team Banter Boys did a good job there. But I'll also piggyback off of that too. We're talking about running backs, P5 programs, good athleticism, maybe good recruits. British Brooks, I think UNC's been putting out some good running back prospects of late. I know he hasn't done much to this point in his career. He, I believe, was just like a walk-on guy for their football team, and he's worked and clawed his way all the way up to flashing really well at the end of last year, and then now potentially a lead back role at UNC. So Kevin Coleman, nice pick there in the 42nd round. I've heard him as like a dark horse to be the best running back in the nation this year, which I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's just too much young talent, but I still like what British Brooks can contribute. And then like Mayan Williams in the 36th by Matlock. That was a good pick because there's NFL upside there. There might not be huge CFF potential just because Ohio State is just so stacked right now. I mean, Mayan Williams is not winning the starting job, but again, I like that pick, or even like an EJ Smith in the 22nd, probably less of a steal, I would say, but a lot of potential there. So you can tell I'm gravitating towards some of those backs that I think have both an NFL future and potentially some CFF upside too.
Yeah, I like that. I was going to say, probably the first couple, British and Emory there, probably more CFF, for CFF purposes. Whereas I actually do think, like you said, Mayan Williams could be, possibly like a later round, or like a late round dart throw for the NFL. I was actually looking at Mayan. I don't remember now like in what rounds I started considering him, but I was really like looking into him and possibly drafting him. And then Matlock ended up taking him, at least before I was ready. But yeah, I mean, the opportunity is there. I mean, obviously there's the chance that Trey Henderson gets hurt, and then what's going to happen at that point. So like Williams could be. Like Williams has looked really good. The problem is he has the best running back in the nation, ahead of him. So that's kind of tough. But injuries happen. Obviously there's a million different things that could happen during a college football season. So he could get a shot. It could be a CFF play, but I like it as an NFL play, especially where he got him. And I kind of wish I'd looked into him a little bit more. But it sounds like you were really focused on the running backs there as some of your favorite picks. Is that something that you normally try to stick to? Is you go with more of the running back upside because of the potential for flipping them in the NFL, or or even before you get to that part, just flipping them in a trade, upgrading players and that kind of thing, or is it just that there's so much unknown with the wide receivers at that point in the draft?
Yeah, a combination of those reasons, I would say. Running backs, they can just go from 0 to 100 really quick, as far as going from relatively not productive versus if John Emery has a huge season. I personally could see day 2 potential. I mean, he's a former 5-star recruit. He's one of the better recruits that we've seen in the last decade, and he's got a lot of raw talent. He just hasn't put it all together yet. So who knows? And I do gravitate towards some of that really high upside, and running back thirst is just such a real thing. And dynasty leagues and C2C leagues, we all want new running backs to come in and inject some life into our teams. And I think that those guys just tend to be valued a little bit more if they hit right. compared to some of these wide receivers. So I didn't list off a bunch of wide receivers. There were ones that I liked later in the draft. We mentioned Drew's pick. That was Christian Leary in the 13th. I didn't mind that last week, but we're talking about later rounds here. So I didn't get a comprehensive list of guys that I liked here, but goes back to our strategy that we talked about maybe many shows ago now. Either draft for NFL upside or draft for really good college production potential. So I liked a lot of the picks that went one way or the other versus there's a couple picks where I just thought probably not productive on the college side and probably not NFL guys. So I guess the hope is that they take a step forward and really produce in college, I'm sure, for some of those selections. But yeah, a little bit less to get excited about with the wide receivers in those late rounds.
I agree. I was looking through Drew's team, and I saw he drafted Taj Brooks in the 31st round. I really liked that one. I felt like that was an upside play. In the 31st round, I really like that player. What do you think of Taj there?
Yeah, it's pretty good. If that coaching staff can commit to him and commit to running just a little bit more, because honestly, they're going to want to throw it a lot. And that's just my one reservation. How many goal line carries or how many carries in general is he going to receive? And I don't think he's suddenly going to become like a Mississippi State running back, who's getting a ton of catches like Dylan Johnson, who you drafted, which I do like that selection. So I probably prefer that to Taj, but yeah, I don't mind that pick as far as in that spot of the draft. Yeah, that's fine.
I like it more for NFL purposes than for the campus purposes, and so I'm just thinking in the 31st round, or any of those rounds, 30 to 40th rounds, if you can get anybody with like NFL upside, I really like those picks, and I do think that Taj has some. Like you said, I drafted Dylan Johnson, and then Audric Estime. If you don't know who Audric Estime is, you need to look at a picture of him, because if you know who Branson Robinson is, he could probably make Branson Robinson give him his lunch money. Dude is built, and he is a true, or no, I'm sorry, he's a true sophomore, and I kind of hoping or expecting big things from him. They were pumping him up in the spring, and I got him in the 37th round. I sent you some pictures after I drafted him. What do you think of Audric there?
I mean, the guy is just a beast. So if he could develop, I do think it's a projection with him just because he's not a nuanced runner yet. I actually really like Diggs, but Logan Diggs at Notre Dame, I mean, he's going to be out into the fall with that shoulder surgery. I believe he had a labral repair. Those are lengthy. You don't want to rush him back too soon, and he's not going to be quite as strong as he would like going into this year. So if Estime can wrangle away that job, yeah, he could just be a beast. But as far as do I think he's the next big running back who's going to be out there, he's not the next Braylon Allen or Derrick Henry, but he certainly could be productive in that system too. So I don't mind it at all.
He's not just big. He's not just built. He had like almost 2,000 rushing yards in his senior season. So I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of running backs in high school that do that. I'm not saying he's the only one, but I liked it in the 37th round. And I also drafted Tyler Buckner early on, and so I'm kind of trying to get pieces in this Notre Dame offense, hoping for the best. So I was I guess maybe I'm just hoping, like I said, hoping for the best here.
Yeah, I mean, you drafted a running back who was a good recruit for a team that can pump out production and potentially NFL back, so I don't mind it at all. And to be honest, I look at myself going back to high school though. I would not have wanted to tackle that guy. He would have rushed for like 1,000 yards against our high school team. So yeah, I think he's a beast though.
He is. I'm trying to look through the teams here and see if there was anyone else that truly stood out in the later rounds that I thought were like steals.
I thought that maybe a Jay Jackson, so I'll throw a wide receiver out there. So that's another one by Todd, and I just think that he's going to put up a lot of numbers this year.
Yep.
They graduated Hall, just a lot of opportunity, and Jay Jackson was already stepping up last year, so he's going to do that even more so. If it was just a bit better quarterback, but better offense, I think we'd see him as like a top 20 wide receiver in all of CFF, but he's probably going to be more in that like 20 to 40 range. I'm hoping more though, because I just landed him in another draft too. So I like that pick. And then there was Payne Durham, Purdue tight
Yeah, I
end.
was
I
looking
thought
at
that was
Payne
decent.
for a while, especially because I was lacking in tight end depth. But that's where, honestly, that's where like ADP and stuff like that just really killed me because I just had no idea where to draft him. And looking at his numbers, like really any of the tight ends, they don't do all that much, and so it's so tough to like try to compare to some of these other players. I'm like, I feel like Jalen Mitchell could give me a great, could possibly be something, either on both sides. Or do I take this tight end that's probably only going to score me like, 8 points a week, but, could possibly be the tight end of the future, in the NFL or something like that. But I did like that pick. It just, I'm probably more jealous than anything else.
Yeah, no, so that was a nice selection there. That was by Mayor McGrumble, Pat. But yeah, I like that, especially because he was the last CFF viable starter, I guess, in the 22nd end of the 22nd round. That's pretty good. Pretty good value there. After that, a lot of dart throws, like you said, and I didn't mind snaking a guy like Nesbitt for UNC. Really, quite a bit later at the 41st. I thought he might be a guy to emerge, really step up, but it's so hard with tight ends, right? All these guys, they got a lot of potential, but they have to both be utilized. They have to be able to develop their frames, right? Be able to put on weight and stay athletic. And good things though out of camp. I think Nesbitt's going to be used out in the slot too, which I think is a really good skill to have. So maybe he's a what is it, Greg Dulcich? That type of weapon who can be flexed out as well. We'll see.
All right, so we've talked enough about some of these players that we fell in love with, but what are some of the players that you're just out on? Like in these particular types of drafts, you don't think they're going to end up being in the NFL. You don't think that they're going to necessarily help a team on the campus side. I brought up before we jumped on here that like I forget who took him now, but Jaden Hazelwood. I don't think he's ever going to become a thing. I mean, he's had ample opportunity to become a stud if that was ever going to happen. I understand he was, a highly coveted prospect and all that, but at some point, just like in the NFL, where you have to go, it doesn't matter how good of a prospect this player was. He's been playing in the NFL for 3 years now. You have to kind of do the same thing in college, and like the recruit score doesn't really matter when you're going into your senior year anymore. That kind of thing. Was there anyone else that like truly stood out in like the middle rounds? Obviously, the late rounds are the late rounds. I'm not gonna like fault anyone for taking a certain player in round 40, but like in maybe like the 15 through 20, 25 range, was there anyone that like truly stood out to you?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. As I get looking here, it's hard because, like you said, do you fault guys later into the draft for drafting their guy? They obviously see something there. Ah, I don't know. There are players out there that I don't have a lot of faith in, but they could prove me wrong. So I don't have too many um, specifics to point out there. I'll just say if you can't really see a path to success for NFL future, not really an NFL guy, whether it's athleticism, you're not going to be in a good enough program, you're not going to produce enough to make it to the NFL, and then you're not going to produce on the CFF side. You got to be realistic with yourself. And there's some guys here who's probably going to be stuck in purgatory, like never really going to do much. So I think Hazelwood was a fair example, or I think like a Roshan Johnson at Texas is a fair example. Kind of even if he stays that extra year, let's say Bijan comes out this year, it's an example of a guy I don't ever have faith in him dominating a backfield. I think that Brooks or Jaden Blue, somebody like that, will come and take that job. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of examples out there of guys that I just don't love for one reason or another. It's hard to point out specifics though.
It is. I was looking at somebody like our friend Levi took Jaden Delora, and I'm just not a fan. I don't think he's going to ever be anything in the NFL, and I guess you can say he's CFF depth, but like he's not somebody that I truly want to be starting on the CFF side unless I'm desperate. And so I guess like I said, for depth purposes, I don't hate it. but I'm not overly excited about that. I'm sure there were some players in that area that maybe had, or definitely had a lot more upside than a player like that.
Yeah, that's a fair shout out there for sure. But yeah, it's easy to say the steals. I feel like those really stick out versus there's plenty of players where I'm like, yeah, he wasn't on my board, but maybe he'll work out for you.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not trying to like not trying to be mean I'm just trying to help the listeners, maybe avoid some of these players in like the middle rounds, where like I've seen that name, like that kind of thing. But just some of these players. Once again, I think it goes back to I stopped caring. Like where did Jackson Dart went? I actually think he went pretty early. I think we talked about him even on the last show, so he doesn't even apply here. But like, I don't want a Jackson Dart. Like I just think that once they show us who they are, it becomes much more difficult for me to just be like, oh yeah, like who cares? Look, he was a 5-star recruit, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean Dart was super early in this draft,
Yeah.
and he's got a lot of time to turn it around. But in the middle of the second round, that's early. That's too risky in my book.
Wow, I didn't even realize how early it was. I forgot. I blocked it all out. But yeah, so was there anything else that you wanted to touch on in this particular draft, or did you have anything else that you wanted to get into with your supplemental? Like, did you have? You already touched on a little bit of it, but like, was there some more strategy that you were going into with the supplemental? Do you do the? Do you try to do more of the drafting for need with the supplemental because there's no waivers, there's nothing like that, maybe trades are a little more difficult, that kind of thing, or are you just sticking to your guns there, and you're going to go ahead and just draft the best players, or the best available?
Yeah, good question. I personally like still doing the best player available, similar to a Devy draft, at least for the early round or two, and then it's a lot of need after that. So I did trade some picks just to solidify my tight end position. I traded for Michael Trigg, and it cost me a second, and I think a couple other depth players that I wasn't very high on might have been borderline cut candidates for me. So I loved getting Michael Trigg there, who I think will really emerge. I'll have to look at my team, but I also drafted a couple other tight ends that I thought were good. So yeah, drafting for need a little bit there. Ultimately, yeah, a lot of best player available early and then drafting for need as I went on. But I don't want this to turn into, okay, I'm going to pass on these good running backs because I really need a wide receiver. Like, you make exceptions throughout your draft and you have to stay fluid. So just keep that in mind. As far as strategies go, too, I do trade around a bit in almost all my leagues, especially ones that have these extensive drafts, snake draft type of formats. And I tried to get premium picks. So I ended up with Nick Singleton and Luther Burden in the first, and then I didn't have a pick for a while. And I mean, that kind of hurt to wait and see all these guys flying off the board, all these freshmen. But again, we talked about how risky these freshmen can be. Like, for example, Raleek Brown, USC freshman running back. He's like 185. He was drafted in round 2 in the supplemental. Like, I'm okay waiting until round 4. I took Isaiah Nair in, what was it, round 5 or round 4? I think it was round 5.
Love that.
Yeah,
I
right.
love
Like,
that.
I'm okay waiting for that. Get your cup. Oh, that was the end of round 3. I drafted him and Andrew Paul. And I just love those upside shots a little bit later on. I'm okay trading out of the second, for example. So that's my
Yeah.
recommendation. Get some of those very top picks, even if you have to trade away a bunch later in your draft, and then continue with best player available as much as you can.
Probably because I drafted him in our campus draft here, but like I'm becoming ridiculous about Isaiah Nair. Like I'm I'm expecting big things for him. So here's hoping he has an amazing year. But I'm glad to see that you're all in as well.
Yeah, there's non-zero chance that he's just as good as Xavier Worthy, but we'll see. I mean, maybe that's pretty bold. Worthy was
It is.
amazing.
Yeah,
Worthy
he
was
was.
amazing.
It's funny because I mean Worthy did, like you said, amazing things, and now I'm just starting to hear people. I feel like once you get to that level, people start having to find like flaws and things like that. So now people are like, oh, he's only 160 pounds, and like I've heard that on multiple pods recently, and it's like, I didn't hear anything about him being 160 pounds last year when he was just dominating, with not even, and now he's getting a QB upgrade. And, so like we're expecting very similar, if not better things from him. But, in similar regards, I heard, people talking about JSN today and how kind of the same thing, like, oh, he's only a slot receiver and he's only this. And it's like, yeah, dude had 1,800 yards. Like, he's only a slot receiver. Come on. I mean, so I think we as a, like the Royal, we kind of go and try to like nitpick these players sometimes. But I do really like Isaiah Nair, and I think that he can be a very good complement to Xavier Worthy. But I love me some Worthy. I've already talked about how high I am on him.
Yeah, no, we both like the Texas team that they're putting together, and we like some different guys on that team, I would think, actually. But you're so right about these guys when they're put up in that elite tier, then we find ways to bring out the magnifying glass. We're trying to nitpick little aspects of their game. Braylon Allen, trying to nitpick how balanced he is, and honestly, he's just a dominant running back, super young, super high potential, and a great system that has put out so many good NFL backs. So we get a little nitpicky, I would agree.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully the past two pods have helped you guys a little bit, whether you're new to C2C, want to get into one, or even, if you have some experience listening and hearing other people's experiences can always help. So hopefully this helped you. We enjoyed it. Obviously, we enjoyed the drafts because A, they took a long time, which I love. I love slow drafts, but B, it was just a lot of fun, especially watching Aaron moving and juking and jiving and all that kind of stuff. It was great to see, and now I know what to do in my next draft, and I'm definitely hooked. I'm all in on the C2C. I'm trying to really focus on getting my C2C ranks up. But man, it's tough. Like, there's so much more analysis when it comes to that part. Like we were talking about some of these mid-round picks. Is it going to be an NFL play? Is it going to be a CFF play? And in between. And so when you're trying to make those ranks, it's not as easy as this player is better than that player. It's not always that simple. And so I'm trying to do it, but I don't want to put out those kind of ranks until I feel like they're actually viable. And I don't think that they're quite there yet. So that'll be on my Patreon at some point. The Devy ranks are there, and I do feel pretty damn confident about those. Obviously those are always being updated. In fact, I actually did a fairly decent update like 2 days ago. So they're constantly being updated. I'll continue to do that as we get into fall practices and preseason games, or whatever, any of that stuff. So Aaron's obviously working on his as well. He had talked about putting together a Patreon or something as soon as possible. How are those ranks coming, and what are your plans for that?
Well, good. I have not finalized, let's say, my updates with that. So we went about doing these drafts. We had the C2C startup, then I had the supplemental draft for 20 rounds, and then now I'm doing a CFF league. So it's been kind of a busy time to update everything, but that is coming down the line. I will make sure I announce that when that's out, complete C2C ranks, and then player write-ups as well, involved with it too. So definitely coming soon. I'll make that announcement. But thanks, John, and it's been a really fun time tonight.
Absolutely. We will be back as soon as possible to dive into some actual news. Like I said, we'll have some player news, some depth charts and things that we'll be diving into. And then the season will be starting before we know it. I mean, by the time we do our next pod, the season will be starting like a week later. So it's going to be exciting. I actually have players that I have to root for on the college side. Like, this is going to be a fun year. Thank you for listening. We will be back as soon as possible. But for now, we're going to go ahead and cash out. See you guys.